D&D Weapon System Upgrades Volume 2. I'm going to show you what I've done with bows and crossbows to really make them feel different from each other and be more tactical. Each and every weapon in my new weapon system have passive effects and active effects, which really bring them to life in combat. We tackled swords, axes, and thrusting weapons in the last video. Link for that will be down in the description. And now that video is the #1 video for the channel. That's crazy. And if you like what you see here with all these different cool weapon features, I got even more where that came from in my PDF, but we'll talk about that later. So let's go. First, we're going to start off with the issues with bows and crossbows, how the rules as written work, and then we're going to shift into my homebrew solutions for both of them. First issue I have is it should feel different whenever you're using a bow versus a crossbow. Even whenever it's having somebody have to make a decision between the two of them, there should be an actual choice of playstyle possibly for which one they want to use. And yes, I know the crossbow has the loading property, which we'll get into that in a second and how weird that thing is. But overall, it should feel different when you fire a crossbow versus a bow. I feel like crossbows should have some more punch and damage behind it with their hits, but then you have to stop and reload, which balances the whole thing out. But if you look at the damage die of a bow versus a crossbow, they're both a D8 or both a D6. Why would you want to spend, you can only fire once and then you have to do the load? It doesn't make sense and it doesn't feel right. The crossbow loading shouldn't be so clunky and then therefore it should have higher damage. And then the bow should be your steady, smooth range weapon. So speaking of the loading property, here's how the rules as written crossbow works. It's always been confusing to me and clunky. I literally had to look up what the loading property was before filming this video because it's just so clunky to me. Then you also have to remember what the crossbow feat does, because normally if you're going to use crossbows, you should take the feat. But I think that's also a problem in the first place. For a weapon to be functional and viable, you shouldn't have to get the feat for it. So the big two things is, as usual, you have to have a free hand to be able to load the thing. That's fine. That makes total sense. I'm not changing that. But the loading property. This means you can only fire once you have fired it. Basically, you can only make one attack with it per turn. But the wording's really clunky because they say when you fire it, you can only fire it once. So that means you have to wait to be able to reload it. But then you fire and reload of it as part of the thing that you did it with, but it's limited per turn. It's weird. And I know some of you out there probably get it and make total sense to you, but I've talked with multiple other people too, and they're sharing some similar confusion. And in general, I love this game. I am obsessed with this game. I feel like it should be something that I would know because I'm so into it. But overall, I'm just saying it's a little clunky and doesn't match up with anything else as far as that's in the game. So anyway, I'm sure some of y'all will be correcting me down in the comments. But now the crossbow feat. This is part that it upsets me. I'm gonna go on a rant about this. It lets you ignore the loading property. What? The part of the thing about a crossbow that makes it different than a bow, it has to do this loading thing each time. Big fire out. Like, I load it now. Like that, it takes it out entirely. For me, this is part of the core fantasy of a crossbow compared to a bow. Yes, I know a bow, you have to reload it technically with your draw, but this thing, you have to pull it back. It's a whole big process here. I think this is part of the fantasy of a crossbow, and the feat just lets you hand wave it. But I think the feat needs to do that because right now, with them having the same weapon die of 1d8 and 1d8, there's no point in using a crossbow if you can't reload it. So the feat sweeps in there and lets you reload it now. But again, you shouldn't need that feat. You see the problem? So I have changed the loading property into a reloading property to polish it off and make it a lot less clunky. Here it is. So the rant's over the homebrew solution side of the video now. The reloading property. You have to have a free hand, of course, just as usual. Rules as written, fine. But here's how reloading works. All it costs to reload is a single attack action or a bonus action. Done. That's it. So before you have extra attack, you would be able to fire this weapon with your action and then use the bonus action to reload. Which, yes, this does tie up your action economy. You wouldn't be able to do something else as a bonus action. I get it, but that's part of the point here. Crossbows should feel like you're spending more action economy to be able to use it, because it does more damage, which we'll get into in a second. Then at level 5 now, this gets really interesting. You have an extra attack. So it does not cost your action. It's just a single attack action of all of your attacks, however many you have. So at level 5, you would have 2 attacks and a bonus action. So you could fire with 1 attack, then reload with your next attack. Now you're back to, you have the shot again. You can't make another attack. You've used all your attacks up, but you'd have your bonus action to be able to do something else with. Or let's reset that scenario. You want to shoot more often. You want to focus more of your action economy on attacking. You use 1 attack to fire the thing. You reload as a bonus action and fire again. But now you're left with an empty crossbow with no bolt on the thing. So when your turn comes around next, you're gonna have to spend something to reload it before you're able to fire. This right here is gameplay. This is fun. These are mechanics that aren't mechanics that just I do this or that. It's engaging mechanics that gives you some choice and play style or what you want to do. But wait, isn't that a huge nerf to crossbows? Why would I ever want to fire a D8 crossbow compared to a D8 longbow that every turn could just fire extra attack, fire, 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 fire. Why would I ever want to use a crossbow? So here's what I did with the damage. If you want to compare a rules as written crossbow to my crossbow, I took that D8 and I scaled it down 1 dice and then doubled it. So that 1d8 becomes a 1d6, and then I doubled that to be a 2d6. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Yes, I know, that might sound crazy. 2d6 ranged weapon, oh my gosh. But you have to keep in mind that you're having to reload this thing, which takes time and action economy. Me and my team did the math here on this when we were balancing this whole thing out in a simulation, and they are super close. In 2 rounds, a character with +5 dexterity shooting a 1d8 longbow over the course of 2 rounds deals 38 damage on average. And that same character, if you put a crossbow in their hands with 2d6 damage, having to do the whole reloading thing, deals 36. That's almost the same. Because for the crossbow, every other turn they can fire twice, and then on the off turns they can only fire once. And as a quick game design side note to all of this, I still think the crossbow could have a little bit of buffing going on, because if the bow still does more damage on average than the crossbow, I think that's a problem, because the crossbow is having to spend the bonus actions to be able to functionally keep up with the bow. So I think there's gonna be some more things we do with it. I think crossbows, this is just off the top of my head, I think they should crit on 19 and 20, but that's a whole nother thing I'm gonna be polishing off for Alcander's Almanac when I really get all these weapons dialed in a little bit more. But now that you understand the homebrew reloading system, which also does tie into guns, which is again, is that video, if we hit 1,200 likes on this video, I will do the whole guns video thing, but I don't want to overdo it on ranged weapons, so it's up to you guys. Timeout. You can get this entire PDF of all this weapon stuff, all this cool combat mechanics, because for martial classes, I think sometimes they get overlooked. It's too simple. Spells are really cool and intricate and complicated sometimes, and then whenever we talk about weapons, a lot of the comments I got in the last video, this is too complicated, this is too... I don't think, if this is your main thing, you want to use a crossbow. That's like what you do. I don't think it's too much to be able to remember what the reloading property does and the passives and actives that I'll get into here in a second. From the perspective of the player, that's all they do. So they would know this and they'd be able to function with it. And if the player, you don't think they could handle that, then don't give it to them as usual. And as a dungeon master, you don't have to use all these things for your bad guys. Every person that uses a crossbow at my day, I don't do that. Independently, monsters are a whole separate thing. I have a whole nother rant coming up about monsters not following the same rules as players. I choose that completely independently from stuff. I'm giving this to my players. Yes, I can use it as a dungeon master if I want, but I don't want you to feel like it has to be too complicated. But if you want to get this whole PDF and even more mechanics to take your combat to the next level, link will be down in the description and it's on my website. I have a sale going on right now because there's been so much interest in this. I wanted to say thank you for blowing up the last video, so we got a sale going. All right, now let's get into these passive and active abilities for ranged weapons. So here's how weapon passives work with my weapon system. Each weapon has a situational property. When certain things happen, you gain your proficiency bonus into extra damage. So as an example, last week with axes, whenever a target is below half health, axes, if you're using an axe, gain your proficiency bonus in damage against targets below half health. So that is the mechanics, but the feel is very important when you're doing this game, game design tips or whatever. The feel is very important. I want a bow to feel like a sniper. I want a crossbow to feel like a guerrilla warfare moving around the battlefield, maybe a little bit more mid-ranged type range weapon. So as a disclaimer, if you feel like bows and crossbows would be a little bit different than my vision for them, you could totally switch the passive and active properties on these to make them your own. So for the bow's passive ability, you deal your proficiency bonus in extra damage if the target you hit is 30 feet away or more. This makes sense and gives bows that feeling of a long-range sniper. They have to move around the battlefield, keeping at distance to be able to keep getting this bonus damage. Now, for crossbows, I went the other direction. Crossbows get that bonus in damage when the target is 15 feet or closer to them. Now, I think this is really interesting because ranged weapons get disadvantage within 5 feet, but crossbows get bonus damage between 5 and 15 feet. So you want to be in this little sweet spot here to get that damage at that 15 and 10 foot mark, not get disadvantaged, but not lose out on your proficiency bonus and damage. You want to get that sweet spot. I think that's a really interesting play style to be able to have somebody dance in between. And this also can play off the play style of having a crossbow in one hand and a sword in the other, and have this mid-range hit and move kind of guy. Now let's get into the active concept. For this real quick though, when I talk about an attack action, I'm not talking about a full action. I'm talking about one swing. So if you're below level 5, yes, your attack is just 1. But if you get extra attack, it's now 2. So keep that in mind. For bows, the active ability is if you spend an attack and hit a target within 30 feet, you can spend an extra attack to not take any opportunity attacks from that target and gain half your movement speed to be able to move away. So thinking about this active effect right now for this bow, yes, its passive was a long sniper shot dealing more damage. But if you want to have that, you want to be able to stay away from things. So I made this active ability a tool in a bow archer's toolkit to be able to stay away from targets. So if they have 2 actions on a turn, yes, I know this is for martial classes only. That's a lot of the focus of the PDF is martial classes. Rogues aren't going to be able to do this. Sorry, rogues, disengage, do your thing, whatever. But if you have 2 attacks, you can attack with one, but spend one of those, your other attacks, instead of attacking. God forbid players do more creative things than attack, right? So you attack a target and spend an action. So you only did one, right? You spent both of your attacks to be able to do this, and you deal the damage to the target, and the target you hit, you get a free disengage and half your movement from. But to clarify, this is only against the target that you hit with your bow. This is not a free disengage for everything else. But now you have the tools to stay at distance. Now for crossbows, these work a little bit differently. Again, we have those 2 actions that we're talking about here. You can spend one of those to have a focused shot. You spend that extra attack and gain advantage on one attack. And this shot deals double weapon dice in damage. So at level 5 with 2 attacks, you spend one of them to focus in on this shot. And now your damage dice goes from 2d6, if that's the weapon you're using, or 2d4 if you're using the smaller crossbow, now turns into 4d6 with advantage for one shot. But keep in mind, the action economy of these crossbows is heavily dependent on your attack actions to be able to reload. So now you'd have to spend a bonus action to reload or wait till next turn to be able to reload. Then you wouldn't have another action to be able to do this shot with. I really hope you see crossbows. It just seems so much fun to me. If I played in my own game, I'd play with a crossbow. This just seems so fun. So comment down below if you have any ideas of this system or you want to see other things and what things you do with crossbows and how you might want to tweak these for yourself. And if you want to see the gun version of this ranged weapons video, if this video gets 1,200 likes in the first 24 hours of this video going live, I'll do a follow-up with my gun system in D&D. Again, I don't want to overflood all the videos here with 2 specific things, but if you guys want to see it, I got you. So until next time, stay creative, think outside that box. Peace.